Welcome to the Strong MD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Jaime Seeman. And on today's episode, I'm sitting down with Dr. Christopher Myers. He's an exercise physiologist, and he runs the Human Performance Optimization Program. He's the coordinator at the United States Air Force's Europe Air Force Special Warfare Tactical Air Control Party. Dr. Myers enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1997 and attended the United States Military Academy at West Point. After graduation, he served 3 tours in Iraq as a platoon leader, battalion operations officer, and company commander. Dr. Myers was awarded, amongst others, the Bronze Star and Overseas Service Ribbon 3 times. In recent years, Dr. Myers conducted his doctoral research and postdoctoral fellowship research with the Navy Experimental Dive Unit in Panama City Beach, Florida, and has authored several books, including The Human Weapons System. He's also the host of the White Coat Warriors podcast on the Influent network. There's so much to unpack about health and nutrition today relating to military and our healthcare professionals. So let's get after it. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Chris Myers, welcome to the Strong MD podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Jamie.
It's good to have you here. So tell us about your background, because everybody that I interview, I'm always trying to find what those little nuggets are that make people awesome high performers. And that is exactly what you are. And we're going to dive into that. So tell people about your background.
Thanks. You're too kind. Born and raised Dayton, Ohio. So go Buckeyes. Yay.
No, this isn't starting well, Chris. I'm a Cornhusker through and through. Okay, we'll allow it.
Yeah, I know. And we win, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, but because I'm from Ohio, I joined the Army to kind of get out of Ohio for a little bit. So it works itself out. So I joined the Army in 97. It's still in high school. Parents had to sign on the dotted line for me. After that, a couple of years, went to the academy in 2000. Of course, towers came down, the world changed my trajectory. I wanted to go to medical school. I actually turned it down to go to Iraq, follow my platoon in 2004 when I was commissioned in the military police corps. So after that, I was stationed here in Germany for about 10 years. Fast forward a decade, a couple of tours to Iraq, many explosions, shrapnel to the back, X, Y, and Z. I was medically retired in 2012, right after I finished my company command. Besides that, I was a broken product of the Army physical training program. So the typical bad knees, bad back, bad ankles on top of the deployments. And that was my motivation to go back to school to get my advanced degrees in clinical and integrative physiology, because I wanted to go work with the Army, especially up there, the research labs at Natick called Usarium, and try to help rebuild the Army physical fitness training program. Well, fast forward to 2019, when I finished my doctorate at Florida State in integrative physiology, the Army rolls out the H2F program, the Holistic Health and Fitness Program, which is their brand new human performance program. So I missed the boat on that one, but the Air Force wasn't too far behind, and that's what I'm doing right now. So I'm an embedded physiologist with a unit over here in Germany. And what does that mean is, so I work with the same operators day in and day out. So I have the same clientele that I work with. So I get to know my clients. So it's not where I have to deal with a rotating number of soldiers or airmen. I have the same personnel that I'm responsible for day in and day out for their performance and rehabilitative training with our embedded physical therapist as well.
Interesting. Take me back to that decision. You said you wanted to go to medical school and decide to deploy to Iraq instead. I mean, tell me about why?
Yeah, so that was my whole reasoning for, besides getting out of Ohio, is to join the military, because to help pay for college, go to medical school. Because when I enlisted, I went as a combat medic, and then at the academy, so I went to West Point. I did what they called chemistry and life sciences, essentially biochemistry at that point, before which they've kind of revamped it a couple of years ago. So that was pretty much the pre-med track there at West Point. But of course, my sophomore year, the towers fell and completely changed the landscape, because when I joined the military, it was towards the end of the Clinton era. And so the biggest thing going on was Kosovo. Well, yeah. So nothing compared to the global war on terrorism after 9/11. So when when that happened, they just really kind of changed the focus. It's okay, let's go. We are a platoon leader. I have the opportunity to go lead soldiers in combat. Let's go do it. So it changed my mind. Turned down med school. Got like literally the last slot at the academy to be able to go to med school. Turned it down. Had fell in my platoon in Baghdad. So as soon as I finished the officer basic course, I went straight to Iraq, and got definitely very arduous, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But did get to see the first free elections there in Iraq, which was amazing. Seeing people be able to stand up for themselves, and hopefully be able to help, as well. But on the downside of that too, got hit with I personally survived a vehicle-borne IED, so a car bomb hit my vehicle. I shrapnel to my back. My driver and gunner were severely injured. Everyone survived, made full recoveries. But between that, a couple IEDs and mortars, yeah. So we had to go through some traumatic events like that as well. So that kind of helped shape, who I've become over the years. I had similar instances with that with my second deployment in 2007 through 2008 as well. So.
Wow. Well, Chris, thank you for your service
Yeah,
and
no worries.
serving our
Thank
country. I
you.
mean, that's a really noble decision. If you would have gone into medicine, was there like an area of medicine you wanted to practice in? I mean, you kind of had this exercise physiology, biochemistry background.
Yeah. Yeah, probably would have gone more into either general medicine or acute traumatic. What's the wording for it? Acute trauma surgery.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that
You
was
like
kind of
the
like
adrenaline,
theirs.
clearly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where I would have gone in, but and honestly, I had a second opportunity to go to med school too, and turned it down. But it just wasn't meant to be. I'm happy where I'm at. I think I'm where I'm supposed to be at this point. So I'm still helping,
I love that.
and it's just in a different way.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So I'm super interested to hear when
Yeah.
were active and, doing these deployments to Iraq, how does our armed services, I mean, how do people take care of their bodies in a way to perform in immensely stressful situations? I think there's so much we can learn as just real everyday humans in that,
Oh yeah.
capacity.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is resiliency. That's kind of the coin term that the military uses, and there's many, and that's the beauty of human performance. There's not just one size fits all. There's a couple of different ways of doing it. So I guess hopefully we got some time, so I'll backtrack a little bit to kind
Yeah,
of give
go for it.
some background on this, at least in the from what I've read in the military. So the really human performance kind of started initially within the military, and it got its roots right around after 9/11, kind of those early times with special forces. And they saw some issues going on. You had the MSKIs, musculoskeletal injuries, but also you had a lot more of the wellness type issues, suicides, PTSD, TBI. TBI was just becoming apparent at that point. And so the ideas was, let's take some of these programs they find in elite athletics, and let's try to apply it to the tactical population, especially special operations. And that's where you get the POTF program. The POTF program started with the Army Special Forces back in 2009 to kind of really get after some of the wellness injuries, suicide rates, and PTSD type stuff that they were seeing. Because again, Special Forces was having such a high turnover when it come to combat tours at that time, right? Because we had the two fronts going on, Afghanistan and Iraq. And so they were taking a toll. And so that was the first stab at it. And POTF is more of what we would call a wellness performance program. So when you look at human performance, it kind of can fall into a paradigm where one side's true performance, the other side's more wellness, right? And POTF falls more onto that wellness side because they have more domains that focus on that wellness, where it's spiritual, emotional, and behavioral. They have three domains that just focus on that, where the others is rehabilitative or family and physical. So it's a lot more holistic in that aspect. And so that was the first HP program you see in the military. And then Air Force picks it up. They create the True North. Yeah. I think True North was their first version, and it was modeled off the POTFF program. They're pretty much mirror objects of that. And then within the Air Force, it morphs into, you get another called Guardian Angels, and then you have all these other. And then fast forward to probably about 2017. At least within the Air Force, you have different flavors of human performance coming out, called through what's called the occupational the OST teams, occupational specialty teams. And the great news with within this program, there's many different flavors of these OST teams within the Air Force. I think there's like 13 different versions of it, and they're different plays on the typical 5 or 6 domains we see in human performance, which is physical, rehabilitative, medical, nutrition, spiritual, emotional, and cognitive. And that emotional is sometimes called the psychological as well. And so you got the big 6. A lot of times now you're starting to see the performance or the musculoskeletal combined with the rehab just be called the MSK, or the musculoskeletal domain, because typically when you have physiologists or a strength coach like me, we're typically working with physical therapists, and we're both sides of the same coin. You have the rehabilitative side and the performance side.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where that comes from. And so that's kind of how, and that's kind of how it's morphed, at least from my knowledge with it. And then, of course, in 2019, like I said, the Army rolls out the holistic health and fitness program, also known as the H2F program, which is a 5-domain model that's more oriented towards the performance side. It kind of balances between that midline between wellness and performance, but I would say it skews a little bit more towards performance. And so that's kind of how the military is kind of getting after it with this resiliency overall. But kind of going back to the second half of your question is, how did we deal with it back then? You just dealt with it. And again, I hope, like you said, that's how we kind of that came about with these programs, because in those early years of GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism, we didn't really have those. It was just suck it up and move on.
Just go out and do.
Yeah, you go out and do, you talk to your battle buddy, or you just throw around a whole bunch of weights, to kind of get through it. Me, I'm an endurance guy, so I'd go run quite a bit, or, find a cycle bike and just ride until I got through it. And so occasionally you would have the chance to speak to the chaplain. The stigma with psychological issues was pretty big back then. I think the military has made great strides in getting rid of that stigma. But yeah, so it's definitely evolved over the past 20 years.
Yeah, no, there's a huge need. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm involved with a foundation called the 50 Mile March Foundation, and we raise money for
Oh,
homeless
yes.
veterans that are involved with mental health disorders. And,
Yep.
people have a life after their career in the armed services, and getting them back into being productive humans and part of our society is a huge hill that a lot of these people face after they serve.
Exactly. But the thing now is, now that we've had human performance within the military for 20 plus years, the paradigm for HP has not really changed, right? So a lot of organizations still refer to our tactical populations as tactical athletes. I'm sorry, they're not athletes. We're not athletes. They're not athletes, because if you hear the term athlete, you think, okay, it's someone that is designed for trains for a particular sport,
Competing in
and their
sport.
day, and their day, everything is regimented for them, right? So if you're an elite athlete or a professional athlete, you know when you're getting up, you know what you're eating, you know how long you're practicing, you know exactly what you're doing, you know what you're eating, you know when you're going to be able to recover, you have access to all these recovery things. Military they don't have that. And honestly, their days are not regimented. For me, as a physiologist, I have my guys for guys and gals for like 90 minutes a day. That's it. And I can only control that to a certain point as well. They're responsible for what they eat for breakfast, lunch, dinner, meals in between, how they hydrate, how they caffeinate, little things like that. So we need to change the paradigm on this got me thinking is like we need to change the paradigm on how we look at the tactical first responder and law enforcement populations. And when we look at any type of piece of equipment in the military or that's funded by a government entity, it's a program of record. And what that means, it has funding that's tied to it, right? Dedicated lines of funding. And it's a program, it's a holistic program. It's got life cycle management, it's got maintenance, it's got training, it's got policy and regulation, right? Well, our tactical populations are no different. And honestly, and it's being said that they're the most important weapons that we have in the military. So it got me thinking of, I came across this term called the human weapon system. And it was basically kind of it was an academic paper that was written. I want to say back in 2009, 2011. I can't remember exactly, but the term was never really defined, but it was an interesting introduction to it. And I like that term. And so I started, it got me thinking, how does this actually apply? And it fit perfectly. If you really break it down into some of its parts, we're human beings. Got that. Weapon just means, it really, if you look at the definition of weapon, it's just a tool. It's a means to an end. So, and then a system, the human being is a system of subsystems. And so when you look at our population, these tactical populations, they are human weapon systems. And then kind of taking that, okay, so if we say they have different subsystems, you can start applying life cycle management principles to that paradigm. So it goes more than just to the 5 or 6 regular HP domains I mentioned earlier. It expands more than that. So you start talking about fiscal, you start talking about educational, learning, life cycle management, maintenance, little things like that. And at one point, I think we had up to 18 different domains, both primary, secondary, and tertiary, that really can affect these populations. And so, at least for me personally, when I start talking about HP, I kind of start talking about it in that type of paradigm.
Okay. And so you went on to write a book called The Human Weapon System. Is that right?
Mhm. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
So, my understanding is the human weapon system and this kind of idea of this tactical athlete is what creates human optimization, and this is the program that you run. So, tell
Mhm.
us about human weapon system. I mean, start to break that down more. Like, what?
Mhm.
Give us the what is the book about? How do we apply this
Mhm.
to our own lives?
Yeah, so it's really like what I was saying. It's how do you have to look at these, the population a lot more than just outside of the traditional 4, 5, 6 domain model of human performance. And for those who don't know, the typical domains for human performance are seen as the performance, the recovery, the nutrition, and then the psychological. That's your traditional 4 domain model. To make it 5, you add in either you add in cognitive. To make it 6, you add in spiritual, right? Um, but within the HWS kind of paradigm, it's broadens that a little bit more, right? Because there's more to the human being than just that. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, how do you learn, right? How do you do education, right? They're 2 separate domains, but they're equal parts of the same coin, right? But they're different. They're not, and that's stuff that's not trained on, right? It's not really addressed. Policy and regulation on for our tactical populations, first responders, that those types of guidelines drive how you train, how you take care of yourself, little things like that. So you have to look at kind of the second and third order elements that affect your lives, and that's really kind of what it comes down to. Than just focusing on the traditional elements of human performance, and that's kind of what it gets at.
Yeah.
Now, those core 5 to 6 don't change. They're still highly important, but you can get true optimization by looking at those other areas and trying to get it all together in one cohesive unit.
Yeah. I mean, I picture it in my mind kind of like a pyramid. And I feel like, in the medical system, my husband was a first responder. He was a police officer
Mhm.
for almost 15 years. But
Wow.
I
Amazing.
witnessed, other doctors and first responders, police officers, firefighters in our own community that really
Mhm,
aren't getting those basic foundational things.
mhm.
It's like I love that you're saying like there's this and all these pieces to the puzzle that really build us and make us who we are and how we perform. But can we go to the just the basic principles and talk
Oh,
about
yeah,
nutrition and
definitely.
exercise? Because I feel like
Oh,
most
yeah.
people aren't even doing that right.
Mhm. That's
So
true. It really you're 100% correct on that, and that's why I love these conversations.
yeah. So talk to me about nutrition, especially, being in the armed services. Like
Mhm.
you would think that our, elite performers are going to know exactly what this magical diet looks like. And I think it's such a confusing area. So give us kind of your insight.
Nutrition is highly individualistic, right? And if you're not eating properly, you could be working out and recovering the best you can, but you're not going to get the maximum portions out of if you're not fueling properly. Because nutrition helps with the fueling, but also with the recovery side of things too,
Mhm.
as well. It also affects chronic injuries, chronic diseases. It can either quicken or hamper your recovery from an acute injury as well. So, nutrition is just as important as going out there and exercising 3 to 5 times a week. It's just as important to get 8 to 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. Yeah, we should be getting about 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, not the traditional 6 to 7. Um, so yeah, that's the first thing. And a lot think, okay, we really need to dial it in. No, honestly, start off with just the basics. Eat balanced meals. Um, you know, 4 to 5 times a day. Smaller meals throughout the day. That's the first thing that's the first thing I do is suggest let's just do the bare basics and go from there. 9 times out of 10, that eliminates most of the problems.
Mhm.
Is just working on balanced meals.
Yeah.
And I love my plate. It's we probably grew up with the food pyramid, but that's been changed recently to the my plate, and that's a really good source to kind of just really start working the basics, and
Yeah.
then working from there. And that's what
Yeah.
I do, is we work from there. Because it's a lot of it comes down to education,
It
and
totally
it's a great
does.
educational piece.
And I don't think people realize, not just physical performance and recovery, but the mental health aspect. I have a great colleague who's a psychiatrist, and his whole area of clinical practices and how diet affects our mood and how it affects our brain and how it affects,
Mhm.
our
Yeah.
performance. And I think sometimes people don't make that connection of how, I mean, we just hear it all day
Mhm.
long, eat protein, eat your fruits and veggies. Like, I don't think
Mhm.
people realize that it affects us on a day to day basis.
It does. It's funny is I heard it's almost like a TED type a TED style type of talk, but it was a special forces team leader kind of talking about how when their team goes out to the field and they're only out there for 3 or 4 days, but they can only since they pack it out. He was talking about they can only carry so much food and water with them, right? And the human body can only carry so much. So I appreciate where he was coming from in this talk. And he was mentioning is how, after the first 48 hours are great, but then the last 24 to 36 hours of the short field exercise, the guys get really grouchy and team dynamics really change. People are at each other's throats. And it turns
Mhm.
out they weren't eating enough. They could only, yeah, they would bring out what they could,
Right.
but military rations are great, but you can only eat so much of it, right?
I was about to ask, like, when
And
you're in Iraq, I mean, on your tour, like, what are you eating? What are they feeding you?
yeah, well, I'll talk that in a second. But it was, but coming out of the end of it, they realized, okay, we need to be eating better food, and they addressed it a little bit, and the team dynamics changed. So it's just really interesting, just on just a small little training exercise, how nutrition affected that,
Right.
just a team dynamic, and if team dynamics fall out, especially when it's with special tactics, because that team cohesion could be the difference between mission completion and mission failure. So I thought that was a really interesting talk that the operator put out a couple of years back. So, but kind of to answer your recent question, what we ate out there, it was definitely different out there than it kind of is now because after a while, right? Iraq and Afghanistan, especially within Iraq, it was a lot more what we call sustained operations. So we had a lot of infrastructure in there. And so it was really different from when I was there in 2004 to versus there in 2007. You had a lot of contracting services out there kind of, so we had an infrastructure. I had 3 hot meals a day on my second deployment, but the first one, it was we were eating MREs sometimes all day, every day. And
Mm.
sometimes if we were able to get to the Baghdad International Airport, because that we were kind of outside of there, it was like, great, we could grab a hot meal really quickly because that was where the infrastructure first started getting built up. We'd bring it back out to our guys as quickly as possible. So, but yeah,
What's
you would
doing
have
an
that.
MRE? Like your first deployment, like what is an MRE?
So, if those who don't know, an MRE is a meal ready to eat. They're very similar to what you can find at a camping store these days. The newer MREs are much better than what they were when I first came in the military. I remember the first MRE I had at basic training. It was it had a stamp from the original Gulf War, so it was at that point it's about 8 years old. So it tells you kind of the lifespan on these things, but they usually have a main meal, a side dish, and a couple, other things, so lickies and chewies. But so meals ready to eat. So they're designed to have a large shelf life, upwards to 10 years, I think, if
Is
I
it
remember
freeze
correctly.
dried or is it, I mean,
Uh, they're usually dried.
yeah,
Yeah, some are freeze dried, some are not. It's just preservatives.
yeah.
You'll find packages of M&Ms in there that have been like 6, 7 years old and they taste great.
Oh my
But
gosh.
each one of these packages has a calorie count of anywhere between 3,000 and 3,700 calories. So they're really, you can get by just having one a day. You're not truly satiated, but you could get by on one a day. Now, and that's just depending on the type of operations you're running. Traditional, typical military ops, you're seeing calorie expenditure rates of between 4,500 and 6,500 calories. So maybe 2 to 3 MREs, depending on who you are, is not uncommon. But due to, and don't get me wrong, they actually taste pretty good these days. Back then, they're like, okay. My favorite was the pound cake. If anyone military is listening to that, they'll know what a pound cake is. The worst was the Frankfurter one. They literally had a pack. It had 4 Frankfurters in it. It was the most disgusting thing I ever had. You could even put hot sauce on it, and no,
Not
it wouldn't do it.
palatable.
Yeah, chili mac was the best. But you do have the same issue with the MREs back then that you do today. Is they can cause GI issues, and that's where a lot of the people stop eating them after a while because they
Hurts
block
their
you
stomach.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that blocks you up, and yeah, so it's Usarium has done a great job with Usarium and DARPA has done a great job developing these, but there's only so much they can do. And
Yeah.
so if you're out there, I mean, just whether you're doing a training exercise right now or even back then, you'd ask people, you'd try to bring your own food as best as you can. We call that pogey bait, snacks and stuff like beef jerky, little things
Right.
like that. So these days, right? So luckily we don't have any enduring conflicts going on like we did back then. So you can only take with you what you can carry out. And so if you're walking, the human body can really only carry anywhere between 80 and 100 pounds. And more food and water that you take, that's less gear that you can carry because it's all weight. So you have to understand when a traditional soldier goes out, they're carrying, say they have their own body weight, then they have their body armor. The body armor itself weighs about 35, 40 pounds. It's a lot lighter than what it used to be. Then they have to carry their full, we call it ABL, ammunition basic load. So if you're carrying an M4 carbine, you're carrying typically about 6 to 7 magazines, 30 rounds each. That weight adds up.
Mhm.
Then you got your radios. Then when you put on your pack, you still have to carry typically about 3 days worth of clothing. And it all adds up, right? So at that point, you're already at 80 pounds. Then start putting in water, 3 liters of water itself is about 10 pounds. You start
Hmm.
adding in an MRE or two, that's another, 3 or 4 pounds right there. It all adds up. And so, that's where some of these limitations will come in too, especially if
Absolutely.
you're, if you're regular ground infantry. Now, if you're mobile infantry or mechanized infantry, sorry, it's a little bit different. You can carry a little bit more, but it's still alive. It's very similar.
Hmm.
So, being dismounted does cause limitations just because limitations of the human body. Clearly.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's shift into exercise because this is more your
Yeah.
definitely your wheelhouse, being a
Yeah.
physiologist. So tell us about training. I mean, you work with these
Mhm.
clients, and tell us about how to train to optimally perform in our daily lives.
Yeah. So the way I train with my guys versus normal populations are completely different.
Okay.
So with the tactical population I deal with, they're highly trained and they're for the most part of the year, they're at the peak of what they're going to achieve. If you look at it from a sports aspect, right? Especially in a competition season, let's look at like soccer, right? Is soccer is almost year round with a couple of off season bits here and there, but these players are expected to play at a high level all year round. It's similar with our military, especially with my population, is they're expected to be at that high level all year round. So we're not going to get a lot of huge increases over the board. So really, it's that type of, even though it's high intensity, it is performance training, but it really helps with resiliency with them. To help, so they can come back, they can deal with the daily stresses, they can deal whether it's their job, emotional, physiological, whatever, right? So it's really kind of designed there, and how do we keep them at that highest level as long as possible, right? Now, on the flip side, when it comes to us normal people, um, exercise is medicine. Stealing that from ACSM, the American College of yeah, Med- American American College of Sports Medicine. Sorry,
Yes.
completely
Yes.
butchered that up. That's their slogan, and it's 100% right. Because just regular exercise, the research is out there. Regular exercise can help with your moods. It can help with sleep. It helps with stress. If we want to talk physiological, it helps with endothelial dysfunction, which can help reduce CVD issues. We don't have to get bigger, faster, stronger, but it helps with regular functional movements. And so it's just, if you work on your back squat, what is that really similar to? Sitting down in the chair or climbing stairs.
Up out of a
Yeah.
chair.
So yeah. So if there's different types of working out that you can do that can just help with your daily lives. Um, or let's bring it a little bit closer to the medical community, right? So if you're a surgeon, what are you doing for 13 to 15 hours a day? You're standing leaning over a patient, really focused on your fine motor skills, but you're hunched over. So that is going to cause neck and shoulder pain. Well, there are exercises you can do to help with that, to help with the muscular endurance, to help reduce that pain. If you can reduce that pain, you're most likely going to help improve your professional outcomes. It's little things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that people don't understand resistance training in particular is the only non-pharmacological intervention that we have in
Mhm.
medicine that
Yeah.
consistently has been shown to offset age-related declines in
Mhm.
our skeletal muscle mass, the
Yeah.
strength, the power.
Mhm.
And you're right, like as we age, as we get older, I mean, just the ability to go up and down the stairs, get up out of a
Mhm.
chair. I mean, not,
Yeah.
performing at the level that we do in our prime, but it's
Mhm.
something that we really have to think about long term for our health. Um, do you use like technology? Do you use, I mean, how do you track the
Mhm.
performance? I mean, when you're working with high performers like this?
Yeah, you can ask my guys. I love my technology. So,
Wearable devices are becoming such a hot
yeah,
thing, patients are
they
coming
are.
in with them and
Oh yeah. And so you got to understand, let's touch on the biowearable discussion really quick. So there's there's two primary discussions going on. Are they accurate enough to be used, and can you use them for diagnosis? All right, we're not worried about this, right? So we're not diagnosing, right? So they do work, right? So, but you got to understand is we're not trying to diagnose. So we're trying to get just enough data to get into the ballpark. So when we look at a piece of equipment to gather metrics, we do the first thing I look at is okay, what is what are we trying to answer? What is our research question? What are we trying to measure? It basically I take the basic scientific method approach to this, right? And that's how it gets it. Secondly, is okay, if we identify a device that can answer our question, all right, what is the reliability of that device? All right. And does it properly measure where we're going, or is it a good analog for what we're trying to measure? And then we go from there. So, for example, let's talk sleep. So there's a couple of devices out there on the market that work. We got let's throw a grenade. Let's talk that Whoop versus Aura Ring debate. You've got two camps that love Whoop, others that like Aura. Well, we use Aura just because the data's there, the research is there, and at least when we picked it, it wasn't there for Whoop. I don't know where Whoop is with the Gen 4s, but Aura has the data there and it's been validated by the military research labs. That's why we use it. But so we use that for sleep data for those who want to do it. We use Garmin devices and other biowearables like that to gather heart rate data and other GPS data when they do their cardiovascular work as well. When we're doing weight training, resistance training, there's devices called VBTs or velocity-based training. So we can actually measure barbell speed. So traditionally, when you lift weights, you do a percentage of your 1 or 3 rep max to get intensity levels. Well, we can look at barbell speed and get a better you can get a better result because your 1 RM and 3 RM fluctuates throughout the week, right? It's day to day, depending on how you feel, how much you slept, how much stress you've been through.
Right.
But barbell speed does not change. It's an objective measurement. And so we're able to tie a sensor or a tether to it to measure how fast that barbell is going. And based on that speed, we can target how you're lifting. Do you want to do a hypertrophy day? Do you want to do there's certain speeds to do for max strength, X, Y, and Z? And we can give a visual feedback to the guys as they're lifting so they can get instantaneous feedback to see if they're hitting the right training zones. And it's the same thing, whereas it just takes the guesswork out of what you're doing for the traditional lifting method. And I'm able to collect that data and see how it trends over time as well. I use force plates. For those who don't know what a force plate is, it's a box, probably about 2-3 feet wide, square, and it's got accelerometers and tension sensors in it, and it measures when you jump on it. It measures the forces that you produce. So I'm able to get a power measurement. So all the others are just regular strength. I'm able to get a power measurement with that. Look at range of motion, and then also how well their lower leg developments are developing through the counter movement jumps that we do on the force plates. So that's some of the stuff that we utilize as well. We also use body composition.
How do you guys measure body comp?
We use the InBody, which is bioimpedance. Yeah. So I would love to get a DEXA scanner. Don't get me wrong, which is the gold standard, but I'm not going to be able to. For one, they cost $140K a piece, and that's a lot of some people don't like all the x-rays being given off as well.
Yeah, it's a small amount. They've gotten cheaper. We have one here in our town that we use. I use on patients a lot, but InBody is obviously a lot more available and portable, and their technology has gotten better.
And like I said, it gets you in the ballpark. That's what we're looking for, right? All right, I don't need to be 99% If I can get 85 to 90%, it gives me enough data to kind of really see, okay, are we trending in the right direction, right?
Mhm.
Because the objective data is only one side of it. The next is actually talking with the clients and getting their feedback as well. That is just as important as the objective. And so, especially with these guys, these guys and gals, they will surprise you. Is like you're going to tell like the data shows that you're not really ready for it. Next thing they know, they prove you completely wrong, and
Yeah.
that's what I love. So,
That's like I had an Aura ring that I can't wear it a lot because I'm a surgeon.
mhm, yeah,
But I love it for the sleep data. But it's so interesting
mhm,
to me, this like idea of this readiness score, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm
mhm,
ready. And then I look at it and it's like, you're not ready.
mhm.
And so like,
Yep,
do I believe this? Do I just power through this? Like, what do I do? So
yep,
you talked about this, human weapon system just really being about resiliency, being able to come back and perform, on a
mhm,
repeated basis. Talk to me about recovery, because I think high, achievers are a lot more kind of hammer the nail, over and over and over.
mhm.
And recovery, sitting still is not something we do well. So
Yeah.
talk to me about recovery with your clients. I mean, what are they doing? Like, are you doing breath work, meditation, is ice plunges, saunas? I mean, these days you see all these different things. What do you do with your high performers?
I go back to the basics, right? So, the first question we had when we were fielding these out is, "Are you going to try to get us to? Are you going to try to get us to do more sleep?" I'm like, no, I can't control that. But so, and I know you have really long work schedules. So, let's say you only have 6 hours of sleep. What can we do to optimize that 6 hours? I mean, yeah, I would love to be able to get you another 3 hours to get you to nine, but I can't. But let's talk about what's affecting your quality of sleep within that 6 hours. And so we start talking about sleep hygiene, right? But even before that, I start talking nutrition. And that's the funny part with because there's two portions of the nutrition that really can affect sleep. The first off is I call it the deadly three: alcohol, caffeine, nicotine. Any of those is going to just throw your sleep off, right? So yeah, you can follow. There's a couple of rules of thumb out there. I think it's like the 10-4-3-2-1 out there, or the 6-3-2-1, where no caffeine, no coffee or large amounts of caffeine 6 hours before sleep, 3 hours. Don't exercise 3 hours before sleep. 2 hours, don't eat. One, don't get away from your phone. Little things like that, right? But
Mhm.
I always talk the deadly three first because that's
Are those
military, right?
highly used and or abused in your population?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, because the monster drinks are huge. Energy drinks are a staple of the military population. And again, it's just because of the long work hours, the weird work hours. The circadian rhythms are always all over the place. And it's just a vicious cycle. Nicotine is significant. It's not smoking anymore. It's smokeless tobacco,
Mhm.
vaping for some. Now you're getting all these energy gums out there as well. So you're getting like
Yeah.
Zen or Zims, little things like that. And alcohol has been synonymous with military since I think day one. So it's just kind of talking about it, and it's just working that education. And then if you're able to affect that, great. If not, the second piece, then let's start talking when you eat. Try not to eat no later than 90 minutes to 2 hours before bedtime, because data is now starting to show fluctuations in glucose stability will affect sleep as well. So those are the first conversations I have. And then after that, we start talking about, the true sleep hygiene is your area how where you sleep at is okay. Is your bedroom? Do you have any blue lights on there? Are you turning your phone off? Are you trying to negate any distractions? Do you have blackout curtains to minimize light coming in? Uh, do you sleep with the TV on? Probably shouldn't have a TV in there. Little things like that, right?
Mm.
To try to help optimize the sleep in there. And that's really kind of how I structure the conversations there. It's really work the basics. And honestly, for 99.8% of us, that's what we need to be doing, is just kind of just working the basics. to improve sleep quality.
Yeah. Yeah. I amen to that. Okay, so at one point you talked about that they had really gone into this like holistic health performance. Like what
Mhm.
other, aspects? I mean, when you say holistic, how does that make it different than how they used to view human performance in the past?
Well, so kind of put in like with medical teams, right? You kind of had these integrative medical teams. So you'll have like a nutritionist, right? You'll have maybe a you know, general practitioner. You have the surgeon, maybe a psychiatrist, right? It's very similar to that. You have different, so we call them domains, right? And I mentioned that before. So we have experts in each of these domains. We work together as a team and really try to get to the root of the if any issues exist, and that's really where human performance in the military is kind of going these days, is you have these teams that work together. Now ideally, yeah, you would have one from all the different domains identified on the needs analysis for that unit or for that organization, but there's usually a lot of factors that limit that: money, available
Yeah,
funds,
it's a big one.
available personnel. Yeah. So it's like personally, we would like to have a 6 domain model for us, but we can only run a 4 domain because excuse me, a 3 domain, because that's all we have available for us. But we maximize what we can and we outsource what we can. And so we make those relationships with other entities in the military community to kind of come help out and fill those gaps when they do arise.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, what else have we missed in the human weapon system? I'm very interested in how, somebody listening can take these ideas of, human optimization and apply them
Mhm.
to, their clinic, their healthcare system,
Yeah.
how they treat patients.
It's the basics, really. You don't have to get overly fancy. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'll like for nutrition, for some of my high performing athletes I work with in the triathlon and cycling world. I mean, we can get really deep into nutrient timing and sweat rates and really dive into, okay, this is how much sodium you should be drinking, iron you should be taking, X, Y, and Z. You don't need to be doing that. It's just really work on the basics. It's balanced meals. Um, you know, 3 to 5 meals a day. We traditionally have the 3 meals a day, but at least in my experience and what I've been taught is, closer to 5 meals, you'll feel more satiated throughout the day. So having smaller meals, and it really helps with weight management and, not with tiredness, little things like that. Sleep basics, right? Is try to, if you can, try to go to bed roughly around the same time and get up roughly about the same time. Try to get between 8 and 10 hours of sleep. I know, yeah, we're not really able to do that, but get as close as possible as you can. You know, sleep hygiene. Try to look into that. There's many different thoughts on sleep hygiene. Do a little bit of research, but if you follow just some of the tenets that we talked about here today, that would be great. Um, and get out and just move. Motion is lotion, right? Go out. You don't have to go and bench press, 200-300 pounds to go work out. Yeah, you can do calisthenics in your house. Pilates is great. You can spend $2 on Amazon and get a mini resistance band, and you can find videos on there that can help strengthen gluteal to posterior chain type of stuff, and just feel a little bit better. It's just simple. It's just moving around. Yeah, stretch, especially if you're on your feet all day as a surgeon, stretch. That'll help. Just little things like that.
Yeah.
It just comes down to basics. Um, but what as a doctor, I know our first thing is really to kind of go through is chemistry. Is the first thing is to let's throw some medication at it. Don't get me wrong. I'm a firm believer in better living through chemistry. I really am. But exercise, just these basics and exercise, diet, and recovery has so much more to do with that, and it can help with a lot of the acute stuff that do plague our populations. So as a doctor, I wouldn't discount that. It is worth having that conversation if possible, because I know there's other limitations when it comes to billing, insurance, and X, Y, and Z. And there's definitely some limitations on the way our healthcare system is set up.
Yeah.
But it is worth to have those conversations. And yeah,
Yeah, we face a
and go
lot
from
of
there.
those problems on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah.
like you talked about.
Hmm.
You'd love to have all of these things, but it's a cost issue, and it's the same thing in
Hmm.
healthcare. How do
Yeah.
we provide this cost-effective care? And a lot of times, the best thing we have is,
And
okay, well, here's a med to treat it because, how, they don't have a chef, they don't have gym access, they don't have, and
yeah.
and as a medical doctor, we are trained in physiology and
Mhm.
pathology. And when it becomes
Yeah.
pathologic, we treat, and a lot of the tools, unfortunately, the doctors are given. And that's unfortunately why a lot of our own, healthcare providers are not healthy. I mean,
Yeah.
the chronic disease burden is not,
Yeah.
we're not immune to it as doctors. And people really
Yeah.
are missing the basics. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, it's funny they mentioned that because so with my curriculum at Florida State, and I don't know how if it's changed now or not, but we took a good chunk of our classes with the medical school there at Florida State. And if I remember correctly, they had one day where they spoke on exercise. One day and organ
And about an
physiology.
equal amount on nutrition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about, exercise as medicine, which it truly is, again, the research is out there, may want to spend a little more time on the educational side of it. And if you're already out of med school, is read up on it, or at least listen to a podcast. But don't discount it because the basics can really help out.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. So, Chris, you are hosting a podcast called the White Coat Warriors podcast here on the Influent Network. So,
I
tell
am.
us tell us about your podcast.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the plug. So it's new. WCW, White Coat Warriors. As you can tell, I love my acronyms. It's really where we're trying to have human performance meet medicine. Yeah, it's really kind of what it is. And it covers a lot of what you and I have kind of talked about in a nutshell, but we break it out on each session. So what I try to do is take a different human performance domain. So one day we talk about strength and conditioning. We've got one on the docket where we're going to talk nutrition. We talk leadership. So that's a big one, right? And that's another domain that we need to be aware of. Maybe not as a young doctor, but definitely as you become an attending, senior attending, and start moving into those director positions. Leadership is important because then you start making decisions that affect the performance of your subordinates.
Mhm.
And so I spoke with a retired command sergeant major of the Army. He created some great tenets on leadership. So what we try to do is take these tenets of human performance. We talk about it, and yeah, there's a lot of tactical stuff in it as well, which I think it kind of makes it interesting. But then we really kind of relate it to the medical side because what we do in the tactical side of things has a lot of applicability to day-to-day life, if not medical as well.
Mhm.
And so the idea is to try to give some tenets that young medical students, young residents, now that I'm starting to find out even senior medical personnel can use personally, right, to help with their own personal and professional performance, but also a little bit that they can provide to their clients as well.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I mean, I was a former collegiate athlete. I have a background in
Nice.
exercise science and nutrition and did some
Mhm.
fellowship training in integrative medicine. So I think very
Mhm.
differently than a lot of my colleagues. But,
Excellent.
I'm I'm picturing you describing like being in Iraq and what you're eating and how you're training and how you
Mhm.
perform. And I could just make that exact analogy about, going into the operating room and you're
Yeah.
working with teams of people and you're tired. And, if your nutrition's not on point, like you just
Mhm.
can't be your best self. And we could just apply it to home life too. I mean, your
Yeah.
relationships, your marriage, my life as a mom, like
Mhm.
we really have to do these
Yeah.
basic things to make ourselves thrive in those environments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. I have got a little one as well.
Oh, they keep us busy, that's for sure.
They
Well,
do.
Chris, anything else you want to share with our listeners today?
No, thank you very much for the time. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris, for being on the Strong MD podcast. Hey, it's Dr. Jamie, and thanks for listening to the Strong MD podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Dr. Chris Myers. We appreciate your feedback so much. So like, subscribe, leave your comments here on our podcast, the Strong MD podcast. And if you enjoyed the episode with Dr. Chris Myers, check out his podcast here on the Influent network called White Coat Warriors. We'll catch you on the next episode.